بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة وتم التسليم على سيد المرسلين. Peace and blessings be upon all of you brothers and sisters, and the young brothers and sisters also especially. Can I ask you guys to move here so it makes a little bit easier, because you guys are standing on the side right in front of the door. If you guys can just shift over here, that would be good. I apologize for inconveniencing you guys. So the topic that I have been given to discuss to you brothers and sisters about is the role of the youth in our community. It's a very vast topic. When I was given, the brother asked me to talk about this, I'll just share with you what I thought of, what questions I had when I heard about this. There's a very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, a narration of the Prophet, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, سَبْعَةٌ يَظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give shade to 7 categories of people on a day where there will be no other shade besides His mercy. So how many categories of people? 7. 7 category of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them shade on the day of judgment when there will be no other shade, no other source of mercy except for the mercy of Allah. The very first person, or the very first category, is Al-Imam Al-Adil. It's a just ruler. I want you to follow along. The first one is a just ruler. The second one is Shabun Nasha'a fi ibadatillah. The second one is a young person who nurtured him or herself, who grew up in the worship and obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep that in mind. Okay? The second person, or the second category, is the person who spent their youth in obedience to Allah and his creator or her creator. The third one for everybody, رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, is a person, a believer, whose heart is attached to the masjid. But here in this narration, the word al-masajid is used, a plural of masjid, meaning their heart is attached to every masjid, right? Because we shouldn't put a boundary to ourselves and confine ourselves to one specific masjid. The masjid is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so every masjid is included. So a person whose heart is attached to the masjid, he yearns for the masjid. Fourth is وَرَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّ فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَا عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَا عَلَيْهِ. 2 people who love one another and have a friendship with one another because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A friendship based on the love of Allah. So I love you for the sake of Allah. And ijtama'a, they come together for the sake of God, and they depart for the sake of God. That's the fourth. And then after that, وَرَجُلٌ دَعَتْهُ امْرَأَةٌ ذَاتُ مَنْصَبٍ وَجَمَالٍ فَقَالَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهِ. And then you have a person who, a beautiful young girl, beautiful young woman of high status, invites him to immorality. Says, come. You guys know what I'm talking about? Somebody beautiful says, come, let's get it on, right? Let's go have some fun. And he says, you know what? I'm sorry, but I have my Lord watching you. You know, I could fool my parents, but I can't fool Allah. I can't fool God. He's watching me. Or in the case of a girl, it'll be a good-looking boy with status who invites her to evil, and she says, look, I fear my Allah. I could fool my community, I could fool my parents, but I can't fool my creator. He's looking at me. So that's the fifth. The sixth one is رَجُلٌ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقَةٍ فَأَخْفَاهَا حَتَّى لَا تَعْلَمَ يَمِينُهُ مَا تُنْفِقُ شِمَالُهُ. The sixth one is a person who spends, he gives charity to the extent he conceals it so much, he conceals it or she conceals it so much that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand spent, meaning they hide it from everybody. They do it specifically to gain the pleasure of Allah. After that, you have رَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. Then you have a person who remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remembers their creator when they're in solitude, when they're by themselves. And when they remember Allah by themselves, فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ, they start crying. Because he's by himself or she's by herself, and she's now reminiscing over life and all the shortcomings that we have had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how yet He's very merciful to us, right? So remembering this, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in private, in seclusion, their eyes, they can't help it but their eyes start running. So again, a just ruler, a young person who grew up and spent their youth in the worship and obedience of Allah, a person whose heart is attached to all the masajid, two people who love one another for the sake of Allah, a person who is invited by another beautiful, handsome person, and they say, look, I fear Allah, I will not engage in this illicit relationship. And after that, a person who gives charity, but conceals it and hides it from eyes of people, right? To the extent that his right doesn't know what the left spent, right? And after that, the last one, a person who remembers Allah in solitude, in private, in seclusion. And when they remember Allah, and we have experienced this, sometimes we are by ourselves driving or sitting somewhere, and we think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we think about all the things He had given us, and how many times we disobeyed Him, and many times we cry. SubhanAllah, we actually fall under that category. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept those tears. Ameen. Now, again, role of youth in our community. I was very intrigued. Why did the Prophet ﷺ say, Shabun nasha fi ibadatillah? I want you to pay attention. Why did the Prophet ﷺ say, a young person who spent his or her youth in obedience? What happens after, so that means a person is young, 20, 25, or as long as you consider yourself young, and after that, you disobey Allah, you still going to go to paradise? No. I said there has to be something more to it. So I remembered, I read something a while back. So did you guys understand my question? Why did the Prophet say Shabun? Shabun means a young person. Why did he specifically say a young person who spent their youth in worship and obedience of Allah? Why specifically young person? Because after the stage of adolescent years, what do we go into? We become adults. So does it mean that when we become adults, we can disobey Allah and we still go to Jannah? No. So the question is, why specifically a young person? In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith, "Ash-shabab shu'batun min al-junun," that a person in the adolescent years, it's like a time of craze and frenzy. We have so much energy, we don't know what to do. How old are you guys average? I'm guessing 15, 16, 18, right? So this is that time that you're in. You guys are crazy. That's what it means. You guys are crazy. Now, we were all crazy, right? I've passed it. Your parents have passed it. And don't let your parents fool you. They made mistakes, you know? We all make mistakes. Our parents made mistakes. And that's what we're going to get into. Why did the Prophet specifically say a young person who spent his or her youth in worship? Okay, so in neuroscience, neurologists will tell you that the human brain develops as an embryo and as a fetus. And when it comes into this world, the developing stages continue. Around what age does the human brain or the human body, the long bones, stop growing? Do you guys know? Around? Mid-20s. The mid-20s. So until the mid-20s, we're growing. Your brain is growing right now. It's changing right now. The brain that you are sitting here with, the young people, not the old people. The young people. Your brain is changing. If you're mid-20s, I'm talking about, or below that. Your brain is changing. This is scientific. The brain that you sat down with 5 minutes ago already changed. The brain that you're going to leave with is going to be a whole different brain. It's continuously changing and shaping and connecting. Now, brains are made out of what? Neurons. And neurons are what make what we call nerve cells. They make networks. So your brain is changing constantly. Every single day is changing. It changes according to the activities and according to our interactions, what we do in a daily life. The teenage brain is very interesting because of the way it reacts to its surroundings and its experience. It's different from a child's brain. See, a child is different. So when you are 5, 6 years old, that's different. and becoming an adult is different. We're talking about the teenage years, when you hit puberty, until you go into adulthood. We're talking about those years. So, do you know how the brain develops? Front to back, back to front. The brain is here, right? From the spinal cord and the brain comes up. The brain develops from the back to front. Okay? The brain develops, and I'm not a neurologist, I'm just trying to get to a point. The brain develops where? From back to front. See, my thing is, I asked myself the question, why did the Prophet specifically say the young person? Why? There has to be some in-depth, because he was Jawami al-Kalim. He had the miracle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with the miracle that in few words, he would sum up oceans, right? He would sum up oceans in a few words. So the brain develops from back to front. And the very last part of the brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex in the front. That's the last part to develop. Now, like I said, your brain stops developing in the mid-20s. Your body and the long bones start developing in the mid-20s. Now, if I ask you, what age does the brain stop developing at the end? What's the last age? Around mid-20s. And what's the last part to come in? The prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex. Now, what do you think the prefrontal cortex does for the brain? Do you know what? What does it do? Decision making. The prefrontal cortex thinks about consequences or the possible consequences. Now, are you guys connecting dots? When does the prefrontal cortex come into play? When we become teenagers, it starts now developing. Developing, because we're making mistakes. We're making, sorry to say, dumb decisions, sometimes even dumber decisions. We're not thinking about consequences. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said that youth is like a time of frenzy and craze. Because young people just make dumb decisions. Not all the time. So the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to fully develop. And it's that portion of the brain that is responsible for decision making, for thinking about consequences of our decisions. So isn't it unique that the Prophet ﷺ said, the young person who grew up in the worship of Allah? Because you see, in those young years, the adolescent years, if you are nurtured by your parents, by your community, and you yourself in worship and obedience of Allah, that's the time your brain is creating its network. The brain, when we are born, we're born with billions of neurons. But what happens as time, there's something called the synaptic pruning. You know a bush? What do you do to a bush when it overgrows? You take something, what is it called? You take a clipper and what do? You prune it. That's exactly what the brain does. The brain, when it's developing, think of it like this. You have an entertainment system, okay? So you have speakers, surround sound, you have a DVD player, and you have a TV. Now, let's say you want to update that system. Now, there are wires that you can use, and there are other wires that are broken and old. What are you going to do with the broken and old ones that you're not going to use? You're going to throw it away. That's pruning. Your brain gets rid of those wires that it doesn't need, and it establishes the everlasting wires when we come to that end portion of the development of the brain. And that portion is the adolescent years. Now, if we spend the adolescent years in obedience of Allah, decision making, consequences, if we make right decisions, consequences are good, most likely what will happen? Rest of my life will be based on that. So again, the prefrontal cortex connects with the rest of the brain through a wiring system, right? Called synapses. And then we talked about how the synaptic pruning takes place. Now, the developing brain needs a strong foundation, a strong base for future development. So that's where positive interaction between young children and their caregivers, their families, is very important. Now, I know I'm supposed to talk about the role of young children in our communities. I'll get to that in a second. But I want to talk about, why did the Prophet specifically say young person? who grew up in the obedience of Allah, worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So positive interaction between children and their families and friends establishes a strong base and foundation for his brain or her brain, which then develops healthy and leads to a healthy life. This is the scientific version of what the Prophet ﷺ said in a simple hadith. That's why he was known as Jawami'ul Kalim. Now comes a main point. See, as a child, the brain is developing. Can he develop his brain? No. His or her brain develops according to the surroundings he or she is surrounded in. A child cannot provide him or herself with that base. They need help from who? Parents, friends, and community. Because a strong community has strong families. What do you think is the main problem with the world today? Degenerated families. We live in a country that has what? More than 50% divorce rate. 30-40% of the kids that are born out of wedlock. Very, very big problems that we're facing. Muslims and non-Muslims, right? So building this base of this healthy brain cannot be done by that child, right? So they need friends, positive friends who have positive impact in their life, and they need parental guidance, and also they need a strong community. So that's there. Does that kind of answer the question? Why the Prophet ﷺ said a young person? Because you see, in those adolescent years, what do? We develop our habits. We develop our habits. How we are in 16, 17, 18, those habits, if we have bad habits, I'm telling you, they're going to carry on and haunt me for the rest of my life. This is the age to prune those habits. If we don't get rid of them, they're going to haunt you for the rest of your life. They'll haunt you when you're in college. They'll haunt you when you're ready for looking for a job. They'll haunt you when you get a job. You know, if you lack in performance and fulfilling your duties as a worker. And they'll affect your marriage life and beyond that, as a parent also. So it's very, very important why the Prophet ﷺ said, a young person who nurtures him or herself in the worship of Allah. Now, a lot of times as Muslims and as young people also, what do you think about when we talk about worship of Allah? A lot of time when we talk about worship of Allah, we think of prayer, right? We think about sitting down in a corner, turning off the lights and saying, Allah, Allah, Allah. That's what we think about. Like that's dhikr, that's remembrance of Allah. Well, that's not the only way to remember Allah. Because you see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. They remember Allah sitting, standing, and reclining. So remembrance can be done while you're driving. Remembrance can be done while you sit in school, while you're changing classes. Hold on. Let's go back even more. Hey, you're gaining an education. Why are you gaining an education? Why do you get up in the morning every day? To go to school, hopefully, and not to see somebody, right? We get up in the morning to get ready and go to college or go to school. Getting education is worship, isn't it? It is. You just have to fix your intention. If I get up in the morning and I say, well, I'm going to go to get an education because you have commanded us in the very first revelation, Iqra, to read and explore all types of beneficial knowledge. I'm going to fulfill that command. I'm going to go as a young person. Hey, let me tell you, from pre-K till 12th grade, man, you got 14 years of worship, 8 hours a day. That's a lot of worship. You just got to make sure you don't talk to her. And if you're a her, you don't talk to he, because that's a problem. If you're worship, because see, every type of worship has regulations. When you're in salah, you can't eat, you can't look around, you can't drink. So if you want school to count as worship, then you can't talk to, you know, that beautiful girl, or you can't talk to that handsome boy. That's a problem, because then the angels say, uh-oh, problem. Then they stop writing. So it comes with its prerequisites. We have to make sure we fulfill those. So my whole point is, don't mistake worship as just a prayer. Worship could be anything, right? Looking at your parents with love is also a form of worship. You are rewarded abundantly. So worship comes in all different ways. We just have to make sure that our intentions are good. So a few of the major factors when we talk about the adolescent brain, it's affected by family. Now I don't have time to go into this, but the family structure has to be very good, right? Today in Jum'ah we were talking about a few topics. One was dealing with social activism. Social activism means to go out and advocate things, you know, to advocate whatever idea or agenda you have. So there are three basic components to social activism. One is spirit of humanity, one is creativity, and the third is positive and noble endeavors. I want you guys to take those. Spirit of humanity. Second one is creativity, and after that is positive and noble endeavors. How do we have spirit of humanity? How do we develop within ourselves the want and desire to help mankind? How do we develop creativity within ourselves? And how do we make positive and noble endeavors? Well, all three of them are supported by the Quran. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas." You are the best of nations taken out for the benefit of mankind. Right? That spirit of humanity, for humanity. That want and desire to help humanity. So as young Muslims today, we have to have that. The second one is creativity. The very foundation of creativity is what? Knowledge. The more educated we are, the more creative and the more outside of the box our mind is. So for us to be creative, we have to be educated. And Islam is the religion, the very essence of the religion, the very beginning of the religion starts from what? Imploring me and you to go and gain knowledge. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always says in the Quran, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not comprehend? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about true believers. They are known as ulul albab. They're known as people with deep understanding. The only time me and you can have deep understanding is if we are educated. Because if we're not educated, then we are ignorant. And an ignorant person cannot be creative. And the last one, or the third one, is the positive and noble endeavors, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have created you, O man, we have given you life, and then we cause you to die. What is the point of life? لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That to test you, who is the best amongst you in doing good deeds. Faith always goes with what? What do you think faith always goes with? When you believe something, what do you do? Come on. Do you guys believe? So then what you do when you believe? You act on it. So faith and conviction drives a person into action. Okay? So these are the three foundational things as young people, and I'm going to touch back on this. Spirit of humanity, being creative, and positive and noble endeavors. So these are a few things that we need to do as young people. Another thing that we were talking about is when we talk about these things, subhanAllah, this thing keeps getting stuck. What is this? Velcro. You stay here, buddy. Another thing is, as young people, so did you guys understand the first portion I was talking about? Why did the Prophet specifically say young person? Let me ask you another question. When are your habits made? At what age?
Before mid-20s.
No, Brother Shahab, you can't answer. You're not young anymore.
Mid-20s and before.
Young guys, what you guys think?
Mid-20s and before.
Okay, what Brother Shahab said is very right. When you are in your teenage years until you hit mid-20s, the habits and actions that we are used to, the things that we do at that age usually carry on and stick with us for the rest of our life. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, شَابٌ نَشَى فِي عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ. A young person who grew up in the worship and obedience of Allah. Because if a young person spends his youth in obedience of Allah, then most likely he'll spend his old age also in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second point that I made was that a young person can't do those things by himself or herself. They need family, friends, and community. So those are things that we need to focus on. The third point was, when we talk about now growing up, what do we do as Muslims? What do we do as young people? So we need to focus on three foundational principles of social activism: the spirit of humanity, creativity, positive and noble endeavors. Now, when we talk about young people are always thinking about their future. Aren't we always thinking about our future? We're always thinking about our future, right? Sometimes we think about our future when we see a pretty girl, right? We say, oh. And sometimes we think about our future when you see a handsome boy for sisters, right? I'm not talking about that future. I'm talking about actual future. I'm going to grow up, I'm going to get an education, I'm going to, go to this university and graduate and then do this and buy that car, that type of future. How do you secure that? How do you secure your dream of 10 years from now? How do you secure that? How do you do that? Young brothers, how do you secure what you're going to do in 10 years?
Make a habit of it.
Make a habit of it now. So how do you decide your future? Or when do you decide your future?
Mid-20s and before.
Today. You decide your future today, right? If you sit while somebody's talking and talk, most likely you're going to grow up and talk while other people are talking. You get my point? If you sit and talk while somebody's talking, most likely you're going to spend the rest of your life talking while other people are talking. I don't mean to call you guys out. Right? So, your future is decided today. How you and me decide and to live our life today will decide our future. That's why today is very important, right? Have you guys ever seen Kung Fu Panda? Yeah. What's the turtle's name? What's the turtle's name? Shifu. Come on, subhanallah, man. How does he know Shifu? Master? What is his name? Master Oogway. Do you guys remember that scene where Master Oogway is giving advice to, his name is Poe? What does he tell him about past, present, and future? What does he tell him?
He says yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today's a gift, that's why we call it present.
Exactly. It's profound. Although it's a Pixar movie, but it's profound, right? I'm not saying go watch Pixar movies. I'm not saying go watch Good Dinosaur, but yeah, But what he said is true. Yesterday's history, tomorrow is a mystery, today's a gift. That's why it's called a present, or it's called present. It is a present from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because it's a present in the sense that you can decide tomorrow by living today. That's where we as young people make mistakes. If we make dumb decisions and we don't focus on education and other things, then that future will not be secured, right? I deal with young people that have marriage problems, young people that are getting fired from their jobs, young people who have drug addictions, young people who have other addictions, young people who are abusive to other people around them. When do you think those life habits were made? When they were younger, when they were in their teenage years. They made unintelligent decisions, and it led them to where they are now. Recently, I dealt with a 28-year-old who was married with a young child, and he had to let his family go because he had a drug addiction. When did this drug addiction start? When he was in high school, and it carried with him. These are habits that are formed. Now, in today's world, as Muslims, we have a bunch of things to deal with, right? So these are the least of our worries. But obviously, we should be very, very intelligent in our decision making. Moving on, when we look at roles, what roles do young people play? You see, young people, they have different roles. They can play anything. And when you look at the life of the companions, they have played almost every role that you can imagine. It's very, very important. The Prophet ﷺ, his movers to take ideas and move with them were always young people, right? You see, there's a balance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a balance. There's the older generation, and then there's the younger people. The older generation has ideas, experience, and they have a lot of wisdom. And the younger generation has energy. They have intellect. They have dreams. And they have the ability to move. Right? Now, if you take either of them out of the equation, we face a problem. If you have older people trying to do it their way, it's a problem because the older generation is not connecting with what's happening today. And as young people, if we try to run the show without the older people, we don't have the experience that they have. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, in his court and in his council members, he used to keep young and old. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala did the same thing. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did the same thing. This was a practice of the companions. They would keep old and young because older generation, like I said, have their portion to contribute, and the younger generation have the ability to take that and to run with it and put it into action. Let's look at some of the companions and see different roles that they played. So you have companion by the name of Mus'ab ibn Umair. Who knows Mus'ab ibn Umair? Radiallahu ta'ala an. Mus'ab ibn Umair radiallahu ta'ala an was, I don't know who to compare him to. I shouldn't say Justin Bieber, that'll be just terrible. And I'm not saying he was like this, I'm just saying when it came to fame. He was a young person who was famous. He was the most famous child, young teenager in the whole of Mecca. When it came to his looks, he was handsome, sisters. He was very handsome. When it came to his clothes, he had the finest clothes. Foot Locker, and I'm talking about he had the best kicks. He had the latest Jordans. He had everything going for him. He had the finest perfume and fragrances. He used to apply the best oil to his hair. He was a pretty boy, right? He had the looks and the financial means to back it up. And he was the most beloved child of any parent in Mecca. And he accepted Islam at a young age. And he was the first teacher in Islam. He was the first teacher in Islam. He was the first person to be sent as a caller towards Islam. He was the first teacher sent to Medina. He played a very, very major role. What is that? He established the environment of Medina for the coming of the Prophet. That's a big role. He was an ambassador. And he was very young. He was very young and he was sent as an ambassador to go into a community where he doesn't know how it's going to come out. But love, support, and community, and you boost the morals and the self-esteem of that young person. Young people can do anything, man. They can do anything. The greatest feats in history were done by who? A man with a cane? No, it's a young person, right? So Mus'ab ibn Umair radiallahu ta'ala in his young age, he was the very first teacher in Islam. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala, he was the close attendee of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to serve the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, I served the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for almost 10 years, right? Then you have Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu ta'ala. Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu ta'ala, he was very young. And in his, he was about 17. And he was put in charge of the military expedition over Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu ta'ala. That's crazy. That's how much responsibility he was given. And he was in his early or late teens. Then you have Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, the famous narrator of hadith, right? He was very young and he's known to have narrated the most narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then you have our mother, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. She was young, but she was a boss. She was a boss. They say 1/3 of knowledge came from her. 1/3 of knowledge came from her. This is something that I would encourage our Muslim communities to revive. Have you heard of Sahih al-Bukhari? We have heard of the Sahih al-Bukhari, right? It's a collection of a hadith. The most famous commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari is known as Fath al-Bari. Fath al-Bari is written by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, right? Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, from Misr, from Egypt, 600-700 years ago. Ibn Hajar by far is one of the most colossal and one of the most brightest stars in Islamic history when it came to scholarship. Okay? When it came to scholarship, he was a mountain. Therefore, he wrote the most famous commentary on Bukhari. Do you know who his teachers were? He had more than 100 women teachers, female teachers. Some of the most qualified teachers in the past were women, not men. They were women. And this is something that we need to bring back. Because from the very first day, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was a faqihah, she was a jurist in a caliber that was not matched by any other man. She was in her own level of intellect. And she used to teach a lot of Sahaba. They used to sit behind a veil and she used to teach. Then you have Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala an, who was the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was known, because of his immense knowledge, he was known as the sage of this nation. Right? He had his tafsir, or his commentary on the Quran, is the most famous. And after that you have Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, the son of Umar, the second Khalifa. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala an was amongst the most famous jurists. And these are all young people. They're all young people. So you see from military commanders to teachers. Then you have Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Mu'adh ibn Jabal at a young age was sent to Yemen, Jazakumullah khair, to Yemen as a government official, right? He was sent as a government official, and he was very young. They held every type of post. The problem today is, as young people, I share with you something. Did you guys ever watch Teen Titans? Did you guys watch Teen Titans? Who's the leader? Robin. For sisters, did you guys ever watch Justice League? Sisters? Can you guys hear me? Did you guys watch Justice League? Who's the leader? Superman. Did you ever watch Dragon Ball Z? Who's the leader? Goku. What other cartoons are there? Power Rangers. Did anybody watch Power Rangers? You guys are young, huh? I see. What cartoons are there? But you okay? Teen Titans. What cartoons do you watch? Teen Titans. Okay, let's just take Teen Titans. Let's just take Teen Titans. Usually, when we watch cartoons, I'll tell you about myself. Like when I used to watch Dragon Ball Z, or sisters maybe watch Sailor Moon, right? I'm talking about, I don't know nowadays, but maybe they watch Sailor Moon, or you used to watch Pokemon. When you watch these things as a young person, what do you think? Like when I used to watch Dragon Ball Z, I didn't want to be anybody besides Goku, because he's a boss. When I watch Justice League, I don't want to be anybody besides Superman. When I watch Power Rangers, I want to be the Red Ranger because he has the biggest sword and he has the most awesome powers. That's as a young person. That's the same thing that we all go through. As young people, we believe we can be the best. We believe we can be the best and we want to be leaders. But as we grow, what society teaches us, and sometimes sadly our community, and sometimes even sadder our family, teaches us is that just be average. You're not born to be a leader. And then what do we settle for? Average pay, right? We settle for being average. But just a few years back, when you used to be 5, 6 years old, you were running around the house causing a ruckus, thinking you were Goku, or thinking you were Robin, or thinking you were the leader of some cartoon. See, as young people, we believe we can be anything that we want. But as we grow, our dreams are snatched away from us. I want you guys to realize that. You can be anything that you want. Don't ever let people tell you what you can be in life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us something that's very amazing. It's called choice, freedom of choice. Going back to what we were talking about, your future is decided today. If you make smart decisions today, you will be successful in the future. If we make not so smart decisions today, well, we're going to have unsuccessful future and a dark and a future filled with grief and sorrow. Now, the book of your life, there's a pen for it to write that book. Problem with young people is they give that pen to others. They give it to their friends. They give it to their families. They give it to other people to write that story. Don't make that mistake. Keep your pen to yourself. Be the author of your own life. Write your own story. Having said that, I want to talk about the last point and then I'll end, because actually it is quite late now. My problem is if I talk after eating, I'm done. Because your mind is more acute and more able to function if you're not full stomach, right? That's another problem with young people. We eat too much, man. And old people, actually, that's everywhere. Men, women, everybody, we eat too much. When we look at the world today, a lot of times as young people, we are a little bit, shaken by what's happening, what's transpiring in America. We're like, how are we going to be Muslims? How are we going to be Muslims? So let's do a history lesson. How long do you think Muslims have been in America? Factually. How long? Who discovered America? Who? Muslims. Who did you guys learn in school discovered America? Christopher Columbus. What year? 1490? 1492. Okay. Did you guys, when he came here, he saw a certain people and he called them what?
Indians.
He called them?
Indians.
Now think about that. Who discovered America?
Columbus.
But then he called people that were living there Indians. So who discovered America? Okay. Why did he call them Indians? Because he thought he was going to India. But were they Indians? No, they were West Africans. They were West Africans. Now, that's another thing I will encourage you young people is to read. There's a lot of books written on this by Harvard, Cambridge professors, and in the past. But they've taken some books out of circulation, and other books they're not very famous. They have found Libyan script, old Libyan script, in caves in New Mexico, Nevada. Not caves like caves, I'm talking about excavations. When they excavated the land, they found dwellings, and they found scriptures that said Nabi Allah Muhammad, which dated back to the 700s. Muslims came, and that 700s, that Christopher Columbus came at almost 1500, 1492. Muslims came into these lands almost 700 years before Columbus. Some of the very first huffaz of the Quran were Africans who were brought into these lands. There is a Muslim African American Heritage Museum in Washington, D.C. that will tell you who's the first hafiz to come aboard. There were scholars that were brought here as slaves. I want you to understand one thing. Get this out of your head if you guys have this. And sometimes the parents play into this because the parents are very confused. Am I Egyptian or American? Am I Bengali or American? You guys know what I'm talking about? Because most of you might have parents who they always talk about Bangladesh. Oh, the Bangladesh is so nice and this and this. And when they go to Bangladesh and there's no heating, there's no air condition, they hate it. And when they come back, they again talk about Bangladesh. Oh, it was so nice and the grass. And then the child is perplexed like, hey, do you like Bangladesh or don't you like Bangladesh? Are we Bengali or are we American? That's a serious problem. Because see, for us, it's funny, but for a young child, it's confusing because his mind is developing, her mind is developing. They're like, okay, what am I? That's why they say confused daisies, right? Because that's what we grow up. Because you can't, sorry to say, sometimes parents say, okay, you cannot have any so-and-so type, ethnic, like they'll name a certain type. You can't have these friends. You can't have that friend. Oh, you know what? The only friend you can have is Khalid. That's it. You're like, okay, but and also don't look at girls. And Aisha, don't look at boys. But you send me to school for 12 years. And if I don't go to school, you get upset. And if I don't get all A's, you get upset. I have to work with boys and girls in a group sometimes, you know that. So I have to look at them, I have to talk to them. No, it's haram. Unpractical, right? But nevertheless, as young people, get this out. You are American. You are American as anybody else. One is, and the main, Islam has been in these lands for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. There's documentation of it. There is treaties that were signed between the founding fathers and the Indians, which is in the Library of the Congress, and they have Muslim names like Abdul Malik. These are facts, undeniable facts. So don't make your inferiority complex of, okay, Muslim, I'm in America because of Trump. Come on, Trump? Don't let media get to your identity. Be proud of who you are. The Quran tells you you are the best of people that have been taken out for the benefit of mankind. But young brothers and sisters, you can't benefit people. You can't benefit me if you're not benefiting yourself. If you're making terrible decisions and mistakes in your life, you don't have the capacity to help somebody else. Because the first question that's going to come is, how come you're not benefiting if you're so intelligent? We have to start, and the foundation of Muslims here or anywhere in the world is education. Education is very important. Now, when it comes to education, parents, because we're talking about roles of kids. You see, kids have different roles. There's something called, in psychotherapy, there's something called conditions of worth. What is it called? Conditions of worth. We all have them. We all have conditions of worth. What is conditions of worth? Conditions of worth are things that we believe. It's that standard. It's that measuring stick that we believe we have to live up to be loved. Okay? So a young person sees about 3,000 advertisements a week. How much? 3,000. Some say 7. I'll say 3. 3,000 advertisement a week. That's more advertisement than what your father saw in his whole lifetime. What your father saw in his whole lifetime. Right? What a young person, that's just simple. 2/3 of those advertisements are usually about the image of self-image. So a boy now when he gets up in the morning, forget Fajr, he's so busy lining his hairline or washing and shampooing, and it's like, Abdullah, how long are you going to take in the bathroom? He's been in there for 45 minutes. Khadija is out and she's ready to go. The sister is done and Abdullah is still inside. Right? Why? Because of self-image. Girls are having trouble with anorexia. Right? That's everybody's looking at Kim and Minaj. Right? This has become the role models. This is a problem. This is a problem that young people face. And it's the world that we live in. But that's what the conditions of worth are. The community and the surrounding and the world around us makes us feel obligated that I have to be a certain way to be loved. So I have to be this. For example, somebody thinks, okay, I gotta be muscular and strong for people to respect me and love me. So for him, being strong is his conditions of worth. For a sister, she thinks, okay, I have to have the perfect eyebrows and everything threaded and nice, then I'll be loved. So her facial beauty is her conditions of worth. Everybody has conditions of worth. Everybody, even grown-ups, we all have conditions of worth. Success will come in life only and only when we are able to let go of conditions of worth. Because what makes conditions of worth? Other people. Again, we're giving the pen of our life to somebody else. Why should I spend so much time? We should look neat and presentable, but why should I overdo it for people who don't even care about me? Right? Who, if I trip and fall, they'll never even look back. So why should I exert myself so much for people to please people when I have my Creator watching me, when I have a bigger purpose in life? Right? So the conditions of worth, you have to learn how to let go of conditions of worth, and then you can become your true self. Because as long as we have conditions of worth, we will always try to meet those standards. I got to look a certain way, right? I know families where when the new Jordans came out, the boy is refusing to go to school if he doesn't get the Jordans this weekend. That's crazy, man. Like, how much did you get those Jordans for? He's like, man, only $200. Only $200 for something you're going to wear on your feet? Seriously, $200 only? Conditions of worth. A lot of times when we follow these conditions of worth, brothers and sisters, we hurt the most near and dear people, our parents. We exert them and put so much pressure on them, we really draw away from them. So there's a lot of things to consider, but conditions of worth is one thing that young people, for you to succeed, you have to learn how to let go of conditions of worth. You have to let go of it and be yourself. Take your life into your own hands. Make those decisions that will help you and nurture you in that young age. And if we can nurture ourselves in good in this young age, the Prophet ﷺ, that young person who spent his or her youth in the worship of Allah will be shaded by the mercy of Allah on a day where there will be no other mercy, there will be no other shade except for His shade. Okay? So with that, I will stop here. I do apologize if I went here and there. But any questions? Does anybody have any questions?